So I think might be a good time to get started if that sounds good.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Seth Riley, the farm manager here at the Farley Center. I'm with Jennica.
Hi, I'm Jennica Skoug. I'm a farmer at the Farley Center.
And we're also presenting with Ruthanna today.
Hi everyone, I'm Ruthanna. I also am growing out at the Farley Center with a Madison-based nonprofit called Urban Triage.
Right, there's an aerial view of most of our farm there. Like I said, we're just outside of Highway 1, outside of Verona. There's Highway 151 driving there if you follow my cursor. So here's the Farley Center. We currently, we would say we have 17 acres total land, but now we have 17 acres in vegetable production. Most of it is down here in this low valley, as well as a 4-acre parcel up top there. We have 10 farmers and 2 different organizations farming here at the Farley Center this past year, 2023. Our program started in 2011 as a farm incubator. Jean and Linda Farley left this property we're looking at now to a nonprofit that has their name and carries on their legacy. The incubator was started to provide land, equipment, infrastructure, assistance to continuing and beginning farmers, many of them immigrants who came to Madison with agricultural farming backgrounds, and we can kind of provide the land and everything for them to continue their careers. As well as a lot of beginning farmers, many who work on other organic vegetable farms in our area and who want to kind of explore that as a career option themselves. So we can provide the land assistance, infrastructure, things like that at a really reduced cost and with kind of support program to kind of continue their farmer education, get more years of experience. And with the possibility of someday going on to own their own farm. But some farmers have been with us year after year, and we think that's great. So like you can kind of see, it is a lot of small scale organic vegetable production. Farmers have anywhere from a quarter to a half acre to our biggest farmer has about 5.5 acres here this year. We do still do a lot of tillage. I'd say probably 80% of our farm now has been tilled and planted in rye for the winter. But we're always looking to reduce that for many of the reasons we all know about, both for soil health, saving time and energy and tractor use, things like that. So we're constantly looking for shortcuts to kind of turn over a bed, get things planted without having to bring in the tractor to disrupt everything before. So before I pass it over, I'll point out, outside of the 16 acres of vegetable production, we have an 8-acre prairie as settled right here nowadays, as well as 55 acres in grassland, cool season mix conservation. We put all of this highly erodible land on top of our ridge into Dane County's continuous cover program, kind of their version of CRP. So that will not be tilled for at least 15 years now. We are still able to make hay, cut it outside of the bird nesting windows and do some things like that. But we were happy to get the funding to go ahead and just put that ground in cover, and wait a while, see if we have to use it then. We were glad to take that out of corn and soy production and put it in grassland for now. I'll point out a few of the things I saw around the farm lately. We do have some of our farmers using tarps to kind of work in cover crops and debris, and then pull them back later to plant in kind of bare ground. Some of our farmers who do this are usually on the smaller scale our half-acre to an acre plots, see a lot of this tarping. And then on the right, there's some landscape fabric that was used to grow potatoes, or pumpkins this past year. But this is kind of another example of like the shortcuts we're always looking to take, whereas we'll probably rake this clean and either plant into the landscape fabric again, or treat it like a tarp and peel it back and plant into it without running it over with the tractor. And then as my role as the farm manager, I'm often taking care of fallow fields, empty spaces that aren't planted every year. So we do a lot of cover cropping in those situations. So I'm looking, we bought this new flail mower, and I'm looking to use it for certain cover crops, maybe as a method for termination. The flail mower does a really good job of chopping the debris and matter up very finely, much more than like a rotary cutter or brush hog that can kind of just leave clumps and just kind of knock stuff down. This does a good job of even within like an inch of the soil without disturbing the soil, chopping up a lot of the matter finely. And then I think we're going to look into like maybe terminating oats and seeing if we can plant into the stubble. We just feel like it might give us a better chance to plant into terminated cover crop. So that'll be something I look into coming up. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Jennica, who is one of our farmers. She's been here for the past year. She doesn't use our tractor at all. So she's a great example of low and reduced tillage. So she'll show you all of that. Thank you.
Hello. So my farm is called Lansing Street Veggies because I live in Madison on Lansing Street, and that's where I sell most of my produce. And so this is a picture of the farm from this year. I have about half an acre at the Farley Center. Like Seth said, this is my first year here. I moved here last fall from a different rental site where I had been for about 6 years, but I've been doing this in some capacity for about 10 years at different rental sites. And then I started doing low and no-till methods. I think it was 2019. So this is year 4 or 5. I might have been 2018. And sort of by happy accident, so my spouse and I used to do the farm together before we had children. And then we had a 1-year-old and we had an old 1986 Troy-built tiller, and it broke, and we were struggling to do all the things. We're also renovating our house, and so we just didn't have time to fix a broken tiller, and we had coincidentally just bought a broad fork, so we just dove right into no-till without really knowing what we were doing. And then after that point, did quite a bit more reading and learn more about the benefits of no-till, and noticed a lot of improvements in my soil and the farm. So the first year was really hard, and then after that it got a lot easier and a lot better, and I would never go back. And a lot of the things I'll talk about may not be applicable to people who are growing on much larger scales, but some of the concepts definitely are. All right. So I just want to start off with some books. This was the first book I read about no-till, and I think it has kind of a hokey name, but it was really a wonderful read. And so this book profiles several farms of varying sizes that use no-till methods, and it really showed me that there's not just one way to no-till. Because when I started, I was like, I don't know how to do no-till. I have to figure out the way. And then I learned that there's not a way, there's many ways. And that was really eye-opening. So then I could kind of pick and choose, and I used a lot of methods from the book, the ways that worked for my scale. This is another book, and I'll admit I haven't actually read this entire book, but I read part of it before gifting it to my parents, and then I didn't have it anymore. But this gentleman is a farmer, and he also maintains a website called no-tillgrowers.com, which includes a growers forum, which I'm part of, which is a nice way to exchange ideas with other people who are doing no-till. And he also has a podcast called the No-Till Market Garden Podcast. And again, people of various scales, farmers are on that. But from the book, I think, so he had 3 principles that I thought were really succinct and easy to remember, is that you disturb the soil as little as possible, keep it covered as much as possible, and keep it planted as much as possible. And the as possible, he says, is really important because he doesn't want farmers to get stuck in this black and white thinking of that no-till is only if you do it exactly this way. It's like, if you're doing things to try to improve the soil biology, you're doing it. Okay, so this is a wider view picture of my farm from this year, and I think it was a good photo to show some of the techniques I use and how things are covered, more or less. So in the very back, you'll see I'm using a tarp. The technical name for that is occultation, smothering by making it really hot, basically. And I was probably either trying to kill some weeds or terminate a cover crop. I use the tarps a lot for that. And so then the next section is pretty bare looking, but it's actually terminated cover crop. I had some crimson clover there, and I had the tarps there, and then I moved them to be able to work that soil. So technically there's still roots in the ground there. Then you'll see some vegetable rows. And then over on the right side, it's pointing to a living walkway, which is white clover. And that's something I started doing a few years ago. And I had heard about this technique. I'd seen it actually at a farm a number of years ago, way before I started doing no-till. And on that farm, they actually would plant an entire section in white clover, and then the next year till strips and leave the walkways. And I really love that technique. But then with the no-till, I was like, how can I do that? And so I'll talk a little bit more later about how I established that, but that's one of the main techniques that I use for keeping things covered and reducing erosion. And then in the front, you can see my stakes. So I have those all the way along on the farm, and using permanent or semi-permanent beds is another no-till technique, because you're really trying to make the soil easier to work without using a tiller. So you want to really reduce the compaction. So I try to keep the beds in the same spot every year so that I don't walk where I'm growing and make it harder to broad fork and work with the soil. Okay, so how I do my bed prep. I kind of took a series of pictures this summer. You can see in picture number 1, those brown things, that's where I tarped the cover crop. So I add compost or amendments or any fertility that I'm going to add. And I probably raked it, but I didn't show that. And step number 2, use the broad fork. And I have a video of that. You can Google how to broad fork video and we'll show you. But it's a big tool. It's a heavy tool. It can look intimidating, but it's actually a really wonderful, easy on the back, pretty meditative garden task. And so once I broad fork, then I didn't take a picture of raking, but I use a bed rake. A bed rake really works much better than a regular garden rake. It just gets it much smoother. And then a plant. And then it's a little different if I'm doing transplants. I don't concentrate as much on the raking. If I'm doing a direct seeded bed like carrots or beets, I rake for a long time, make it really smooth. That's definitely one of the hardest steps. One of the tools I'm looking into getting in the future is called a tilther, which basically smooths the top of the soil without turning it over and makes a really nice bed. Yeah, so that's basically it. And I guess one of the things I'm changing for next year, all my beds used to be set up as 5-foot beds with a 1-foot walking path, and I'm changing everything, which is a big deal since I have permanent beds, not this year, I guess. to 30-inch beds with an 18-foot walking path. And that is to match better the size of the broad fork and the other tools that I use. So instead of trying to take 2 passes with the broad fork to prep one bed, 30 inches matches the size, so I only have to take 1 pass. So the mental game is a lot easier. Okay, so I'll play this video first. This is just a video of my 5-year-old doing the broad fork, and just to show that it's intimidating, but it's actually not that hard. Yeah, exactly. And also shows that it doesn't turn the soil, it just lifts it. And I would probably, if I was doing it, I would try to get the tines in a little bit further, and not go back quite as far as she did. She kind of fell over, but that's the idea. And then if you were going to continue doing the whole bed, you would kind of drag the broad fork backwards 6 to 12 inches, repeat. So my other notes about bed prep, I think that planning with doing no-till is really crucial. I mean, it's crucial to anyone who's farming, but I think really spending the time in the winter to be like, what's coming in this bed, what was there last year, and what's going to be coming after it. Am I doing successions? Is this a full year crop? How am I going to terminate this crop? Makes it much more possible, instead of just showing up and be like, oh, I was going to put carrots here, but this bed is full of weeds, or this bed is, has huge broccoli stalks in it. That's going to be hard. So really thinking that through and incorporating that planning into your crop rotation that you do every year makes it much more doable. So then weed control, obviously for you prepping beds with a broad fork, becomes very important if you're planning not to use a tillage to manage those weeds, whether it's in the walkways or for bed prep. And I have a whole section on weed control in a moment. And I already talked about the bed width. Oh, no, didn't mean to do that. Sorry, everyone. She is cute. She's not that cute. Okay. So flipping beds. I've tried a number of things to change from one crop to the next if I have crops that aren't full season. So this is a picture of my snap peas in June, and then I do just 1 row of snap peas down the middle of the bed because it makes them easier to pick. So then you have a lot of soil exposed on either side. So in the earlier spring, I had lettuce and bok choy on the sides of the peas, and then I harvested that before the peas were done. And then I had this really nice already raked soil, so I put it directly into carrots on one side and beets on the other. So that's what the drip is watering there. And that worked out really well. And again, because I wasn't tilling when the peas came down or were done, I didn't have to do anything. Like the next crops were already growing. I see a question here for, do I put compost on top of terminated cover crop, then broad fork and rake? Wonder if you rake the cover crop first or just put compost on top of the terminated cover crop. I think in the pictures, I just put the compost on top of the terminated cover crop because I was doing transplants. And so it's easy to just kind of use your hands and like make a little spot, put in your cabbage or whatever. If I was planting carrots, I would have raked off that terminated cover crop because that would have been just in the way of seeding the bed. Good question. I also, when possible, I try to replant right away. And if I'm not going to replant right away, then I try to cover it with a tarp or something. Tarp, or if it's going to be empty for a long time, I'll put it in a cover crop. I also, when I'm flipping bed, I try to leave the roots in the ground as much as possible, just again to increase that soil biology, because those roots draw in so many great microorganisms and fungi and things that are improving the soil. So for example, I flipped a bed this summer that I was pretty proud of, where I had cauliflower. I finished harvesting the last of the cauliflower over a number of weeks, and then I just used my field knife. I cut the cauliflower off right at the soil level, which, because it was pretty well weeded, it didn't take that long. And then I made furrows and I planted beets and it worked great. Not everything's in here. Oh, there we go. Okay. So weed control. Oh, again, yep. So I keep everything covered as much as possible. For anything that's gonna be long season crops, here you can see kale, chard, some sprouting broccoli that I tend to use all season. I just mulch the heck out of it. I think it's worth every penny and every minute of time, because that, I weed once or twice and when it's too young to mulch, sometimes they're too small. As soon as they're big enough to mulch, I just mulch them really thick and then I don't touch that bed again all season. So in the end, I feel like it's really a time saver for not having to cultivate those areas. And then I use the living walkways as weed control in my aisles. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Seth already showed the landscape fabric. This is winter squash and some sweet potatoes. For some of my crops, like onions, I burn holes in the landscape fabric and plant them into the holes. That's one technique. In this case, I plant I broad fork just a really skinny strip, maybe like a foot wide. I lay down the tarps and I don't have any holes in them. So I get the tarps as close to the squash plants as possible, plant everything. And then again, when the plants are big enough, I mulch that little strip again, just to not have to do that additional cultivation. I think it's really worth it. Do I prefer kind of mulch? Yeah, so I just bought some really nice marsh hay from a gentleman in Sun Prairie that is just called Yelk Hay Supply, and that's what he does. Where do I get it? He doesn't have a website, he doesn't have a Facebook page. I just have his phone number from somebody I got it from years ago. Yelk Hay Supply in Sun Prairie.
I'll share a number.
Yeah,
if you do.
Excellent.
So like weed-free mulch.
Yeah.
Some hay and like clover, things like that. If you know someone who's reliable and is consistently clean. But sometimes you can get bad hay and then that's a disaster. So the marsh hay is much more reliable and easy to use. And not too much more expensive either.
Yeah, this gentleman charges $4.50 a bale for their smaller bale size, and there's a $25 delivery fee for like as many bales as you want. So yeah, it's pretty great. All right, Seth is going to get the phone number, but I'm going to go to the next slide. So some weed control picture here. This is not a picture at the Farley Center, my previous farm. But I have some cover crop section going on right here. I don't know what cover crop that is, but hopefully you can see that it's very thick. And I once heard the term smother crops instead of cover crops. And I think I do that a lot where I just plant it really thickly and to just drive out the weeds as much as possible. I'm sure most of you are familiar with wheel hose. This picture is an example of weeds that got away from me a little bit, but the wheel hoe did a good enough job. I was able to save it. You can see on the other side what it looked like at the end. But I think timing is also really important for efficiency and keeping weeds down. If I have too many what I call rescue situations, that's not good, as I'm sure you all know. So I think prioritizing which bed to weed if I only have a certain amount of time, I would choose the one that the weeds are actually smaller versus the one where the weeds are bigger, unless I'm really trying to save something that I know I can't otherwise save. Because otherwise, if it waits another week, then those little weeds are just going to become big weeds, and then everything is a rescue situation.
It's a question about landscape fabric.
Oh, okay.
And soil compaction.
Okay. Am I concerned about compaction or altering the soil microbiome when using landscape fabric? We are considering using landscape fabric. Okay. I'm not too concerned about that. I believe I read, I don't remember where I read it. I don't remember when I read it, but that tarping does not alter the soil microbiome significantly. That basically it's fine, because it really mostly it works by contact when you use the black fabric or plastic on stuff. So like it doesn't work in the winter really. The sun has to heat up that black, and whatever's touching that is going to die. So the soil is generally, you know, maybe the first layer is touched, I don't know, but like underneath.
But then walking, trampling it.
Right, so then trampling it, it is a little bit of an issue in the squash area, because the bed and walkway system is so thrown off because the plants just go everywhere. But I do think that by setting it up for success in terms of not having to weed it, so that's why I do the fabric and then I mulch in between, because otherwise you're walking in there to weed, and you don't know where the walkway is, and you probably are compacting things. But so I set it up that way when I plant it, or shortly after I plant it, and then I basically don't walk in there until I harvest it. And yeah, you have to walk in there to harvest it. You just can't get around that. The squash go everywhere. So there is probably some soil compaction. I think that's why I said it in semi-permanent beds, because the squash section always kind of messes things up a little bit. Yeah. All right. Next. Okay, so this is a better example of we got to the weeds on time. And so this is a picture of a rogue hoe. There are so many options for, you know, any kind of scuffle hoe. I'm sure you all know is really great. You can get wire weeders, you can get collinear hoes, you can get actual scuffle hoes. I like this type just because I've used it for a long time. And I feel like this picture illustrates that if you're weeding at the right time, somebody should be able to fall asleep on your back. If somebody can't fall asleep on your back, you missed it. Not that, you know, it's like, that's the best time to do it.
Has this field been tarped?
This field was before we did no-till, because the baby on my back is now 5.5. So that had been tilled. And now I'm seeing like, oh, look at how much I'm trampling it. I'm so embarrassed.
Yeah, you can see the footprints and everything.
But it was a nice example of using the hoe at a time when the weeds were still really little. All right. Okay, so this is a website. I don't think we even have time for me to navigate to this website, but it's worth a visit, neversinkTools.com. This gentleman, I believe, was featured in the No-Till Organic Revolution Farming book. And he has this whole other business of tools that he's developed for no-till. And every time I go to his website, I'm like, wow, I want this one and this one and this one. And oh, I could spend like $3,000 here. But he has some really cool things. He has the tilther. He has some cool bed markers. Yeah, just all sorts of neat stuff that's definitely worth looking at if you're considering doing more no-till. So living walkways, I talked about this a few times. I use white clover, and how I plant it without tilling is I go out to the garden in like mid-March, when usually that's around the time when I know we're going to have several more frosts, but not that many more frosts. So it's called frost seeding. You can look that term up if you want. But again, if you have permanent beds that are already staked, it's pretty easy to know where are your walkways. And I just take the clover seed and I walk right along the walkway. I try to string it makes for a better result. Just in that 1 foot wide section. And the heaving of the frost helps incorporate that seed into the soil. And I usually get pretty good results in germination. So there are some disadvantages of using the living walkways. They do need mowing. The clover can creep into beds, although I find that it's a little bit like strawberries creeping, like it doesn't happen that fast. And it's pretty easy to like pull it back. So like I have some pictures of when I was harvesting some of my fall crops and the clover had creeped into the bed and I just kind of crawled along and just pulled it back like a carpet. And it can be time intensive to establish because I sometimes, like the first time I plant them, I end up weeding them. Like there are a few weeds like lamb's quarter and thistle and ryegrass that just get in there anyway. But if you pull them out once, the clover is vigorous enough that they don't come back. And then the clover can last for at least 2 seasons. And obviously it's adding nitrogen to the garden, it's reducing erosion, increasing water retention. And it's, I think one of the main advantages, it makes it much easier to garden if it's wet. So I feel like I can go out to my field even in the rain. And if I stay on the walkways, I don't feel like I'm doing damage to my soil. Are 18-inch pathways too small to mow? No, you have to be pretty tricky with your mower. I just have a
Get a small mower.
or you can get a small
Or string trimmers.
Yeah,
Too.
I've thought about getting something like that. There we go. So just that she was sitting on that clover and it's just such a nice.
What are we doing with that tent over there? Yeah.
Jennica, we can't see your screen right now.
Oh,
We lost you for a moment, or at least I lost you for a moment. So you might need to share the screen again.
All right, 1 second. Were you able to view that video you just shared?
No, I
Okay.
don't know if everyone else. Ruthanna's shaking her head, so I think everyone might have lost you.
Were you able to see it?
Yep, we can see it now.
What are you doing? What are we doing with that tent over there? Yeah.
right. So you can see that it's just and it's just a really nice place to work from. I, sit in it, walk in it.
Yeah, and I think you being able to work in wet conditions, especially for like harvesting days and things like that, was pretty good, and not like mucking around and damaging the soil and dealing with
Right. The not having super muddy boots is like a side benefit, but it's pretty nice side benefit.
Yeah.
This is just sorry.
I should mention during like the wet conditions, Jenica's field isn't probably the wettest part of our farm, where a lot of the washout from our ridge comes down and meets up with a creek, and it's in a very low spot. So yeah, I'm always impressed that you're able to stay on the harvesting and do other activities when a lot of our farmers are sidelined.
Thanks. This is just another picture of how nice the clover is in between the beds. And I've heard you can do living walkways with other plants. I've even heard of people just like mowing the weeds instead of wheel hoeing them. Or you can do it with other cover crops. I just think personally that the clover is so nice. Not sure if there's anything on there. Oh, it's another video. Oh, this is harvesting carrots in the snow because it was really muddy and we were still able to walk because we were walking on the clover. And there you go, lots of mulch everywhere. I mulched my storage crops this year, so I have a kind of a focus on winter crops. And just because I wasn't sure if everything was going to freeze or if I was going to be able to still get in there. And then I'll use that mulch for something else next year. All right. More pictures of living walkways. So on the top here, you can see this is the clover, and this picture was taken a few weeks ago, so early November, celeriac. And what I had done was the clover was creeping into the bed. So you can see here are some of the like runners. And these are pretty easy to pull back. They're not stuck in there like glue. I just grabbed my fistful and just pulled them, you know, it took maybe 5 minutes. But I just was really impressed that underneath here, you can, hopefully you can see just like this tangle of roots and fungal networks and all sorts of things. And I was like, wow, that looks really nice. And the celeriac also looked pretty nice. And I thought that was maybe a good example of how the no-till and the living walkways kind of work together and make good soil. Also, I think the clover maintains a lot of green cover on the farm because it is a perennial, even in the late season, much like other cover crops. But you're like, oh, I did all this work to establish these walkways, and now like one of my sections will be cover crop next year, so I intentionally did not mow that clover back the last half of the gardening season, and it is becoming the cover crop next year. I don't know if I'll even have to plant anything because it's just creeping into the bed on its own. All right, and that's all.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hello again, everyone. I'm Ruthanna. I'm also farming out at the Farley Center, right next to Jennica, actually. So here I have a photo of our field from this season. It is our second season out at the Farley Center, and our first season out there, we were pretty interested in looking at reduced tillage practices. So getting into that, we really started with purchasing silage tarps and establishing cover crops to prep our fields for growing before our first season. So I think our first season we planted oats and peas and worked with the UW Extension and Rue particularly. So I don't have photos here of that, but that previous season, Rue did come out with a roller crimper to terminate those oats and peas our first year. So that's what we did our first season. And once they were terminated, we covered them with silage tarps just to prepare the ground for planting. You could go to the next slide if you don't mind. So this is our field from this year. And again, we're using a silage tarp, so it's just a photo of that. I believe we had, it was like rye and radish, I believe, was our cover crop.
And vetch.
And vetch, okay. And so like how we, like many of our processes are very similar to what Jennica does. So as needed, we'll rake away the cover crop if needed. Otherwise, we also use a broad fork and we'll just prep our beds that way. Yeah, so that's just a photo of. So for this year, yeah, so we also have a high tunnel. This is what it looks like on the inside. Last year we mulched with cardboard. Actually, we didn't have the high tunnel last year, but last year we used cardboard. This year we used hay. As you can see, kind of along the edges of the tunnel, the weeds really popped in through the edges. But overall, I'm pretty happy with how well the hay works, as long as you lay it down thick enough. Yeah. I also enjoyed, I think the cardboard worked really well if you're working with a smaller space, but it's just having access to that quantity of cardboard. It can be a little irritating having to soak it and cut through it to plant into it. But if you're willing to do that work, it worked pretty well for us last year. And I think that might be like my last photo, but if anyone has any particular questions, we also managed weeds with a wheel hoe. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much, Seth, Jennica, and Ruthanna. I just want to invite people to share questions if you wanted to ask any of them any questions about their production practices. I had a question that's mainly for Jennica, I think. Jennica, I noticed with the broad fork that you're using one. I think it looks like one that I've used that has flat tines, it's all metal. And I wondered if you have ever used one that has round tines and whether you think there's a difference there. And also whether you find that it's always necessary to broad fork. I know that this is your first year at the Farley Center, but like over time, do you think that there's a potential to have lower compaction in those semi-permanent beds and maybe not always have to broad fork intensively?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have seen the ones with round tines. I haven't used one. But yeah, I have seen them. And so our previous farm site, the soil was pretty heavy clay. So we bought this one. I think it's called the unbreakable broad fork because we were afraid it was going to break in the clay. And then, so I think at the previous garden site, we were doing no-till for about 3 seasons. And by the 3rd season, there were several beds that I was able to plant into without broad forking. So yeah, I do think and hope that can get there depending on what crop was there the previous year, and also like what the soil is like. The current garden at the Farley Center has much lower clay content. So I'm guessing that transition will happen a little bit faster, because the soil is really low and nice to work with. But and then during the season, like when I flip a bed, I don't broad fork it generally. Yeah, and unless there was a cover crop there previously, because I think sometimes things just kind of settle even if it wasn't walked on that much.
We had a question about discussing landscape fabric versus the thin plastic mulch, and removing and reusing it. I do know that the thin plastic is required to be removed because it degrades so quickly and probably gets worked in the soil. I should check with our certifier about that landscape fabric. However, I know it's used in production for like strawberries and some perennial crops often too, and it just gets left out there and it just lasts longer. But definitely something we should think about. What's the other question? Let me get down there. Heavy clay soil. Anyone have experience using tillage radish in your cover crops? We have used tillage radish in the past, but it doesn't always bust through like particularly hard pans and rocky fields. We have used it before, and it does work its way in, but sometimes it does kind of get pushed back up and it'll start to grow out of the soil instead of to continue down. I know there are some like grasses that have been recommended, like deep rooting grasses like sorghum Sudan grass. Doesn't penetrate as much
Did we lose Seth?
Yeah, I think so. I will just say one thing with tillage radish. I was discussing that question with the cover crop breeder from UW-Madison. He said that if you have a compaction layer, although people like the idea of using tillage radish in that situation, it's probably not going to be able to penetrate a really tight compaction layer. In a looser soil, it's going to add a good amount of organic matter and provide those channels down into the soil. But if you're dealing with something like a plow pan, tillage radish is maybe not going to be able to penetrate something like that. But yeah, I think just having those channels into the soil in a less compacted situation can be really nice.
I did want to mention as well that I particularly use that rounded tine broad fork. The brand I have is, I believe, Treadlight, which is in like Fond du Lac or something, Wisconsin, that I purchased it from. And I do like it, but I've also used Jennica's. Ours is a bit wider and it has the wooden handles. And I get like a lot of pros and cons to each of them, but the rounded tine one, I particularly chose that one is just because it was the widest broad fork I could find, so that I wouldn't have to do multiple passes when prepping a bed. But they're like, Jennica's is a lot sturdier and heavier. So in ways it's a little bit faster to, it's a little bit faster, but it's a little bit narrower.
Yeah, I would share another recommendation for the Treadlight ones from another one of our farmers, as they are very light. You can pay for metal handles that might make them last a little longer, but the ease of use with the Treadlight, I really enjoyed. It seemed to just cut through the soil pretty easily. I should mention that there is, at least in Dane County, a soil health equipment cost sharing program that you could reach out. I know Madison Baumgartner told me about it, but it's a program that could cover up to 70% of the costs of equipment that is purchased, new or used, to help reduce tillage in the Dane County area.
And I wanted to say, my previous garden site did have pretty heavy clay soil. And I did use tillage radish. I can't say I noticed a significant difference from that specifically, but anytime I was able to leave roots in the ground and add organic matter, I do think that helped make the clay a little bit more workable. There was also an article recently in the Market magazine, the Market Grower magazine. Yeah. Yes. About farming with clay soil. And then the landscape fabric that I currently have, I think I'm on season number 4 with that landscape fabric, and it still looks pretty good. And if you're going to use it, I would definitely suggest taking the time to, if you're going to cut it or make holes in it at all, use some sort of device that gets hot. So you melt the edges instead of just cutting them, so it doesn't unravel.
I would second that, Jennica. I've used a heated, like an electric heated knife to cut the edges, and it's so much nicer. In our group, at the university, we have been using landscape fabric for probably about the same length of time, and it's still in great shape. But that heated knife made a huge difference to just the ease of use, not having those fraying edges and not having to worry about leaving plastic in the field.
Yeah, and to burn the holes, this is probably a pretty common tool, but we just have like a propane tank with a big torch. It's not anything special. I think we got it from Menards, and it does a good job. It takes a little practice with learning how to like really warp your landscape fabric. You kind of have a technique of how fast to do it and how much fire to give it. But yeah, then this makes a pretty clean hole. And I do roll mine up at the end of the season just to kind of extend its life and get a little less weathering. But
So when you're using tarps to kill a cover crop, how much time are you typically leaving those on for?
it depends on
How much heat?
Yeah, it depends on how hot it is. So I would say in the middle of the summer, like 2 weeks. But if it's not as hot, I would give it more like 3 to 4 weeks. Yeah. And it also depends on how busy I am. I don't know, Ruthanna, do you have a thought on that use?
I'd say we were more in the 3 to 4 week range with our large plastic silage tarps, using those.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I haven't never used silage tarps. I have old billboards that I've been using for years, which are nearing the end of their life, but they're very, very heavy to move around. And that's definitely one of the disadvantages of using tarps. With the clover walkways so I've been using that more and more. And like every year I use it in more sections of the farm because I get a little bit better at kind of like establishing it and working with it. I actually took my billboards and I cut them to the width of my bed so that I don't kill the walkways. And that's definitely like changed my attitude towards tarps because I used to look at them and be like, I can't move that today. I'm out of energy. But that it's definitely much more workable for one person farm team to move thinner tarps.
That makes me wonder about being able to like roll them up onto some kind of a reel set at the end of the bed. I know a farmer who uses a system like that, but being able to manage them just in those long, narrow strips, that might be kind of attractive just for the ease of use.
I would recommend if you can use them to get something that you like that where you can roll it up at the end, just because they are a lot to wrangle with on their own. So
yeah.
Hey, Rue.
Oh, hey,
if tillage radish doesn't work, is there another cover crop that would work that would penetrate through a plow pan?
I don't know of one. I think that would be, and when I was talking to Lisa Kissen-Kusek, who's the cover crop breeder I was referring to, she did not mention another cover crop that would be able to do that. I think there is like if you have a really bad plow pan, there is a level where roots just aren't going to be able to bust through. And so then there may be a case for just very limited deep ripping to break through that plow pan so that then you can start to have the biological activity to break through it.
Would you be able to evaluate the effectiveness by using, say, like a penetrometer to see how like compacted it actually is? Or would that not tell you?
No, that's definitely what I would want to use in that case. So for those who don't know, a soil penetrometer is, you can use something as simple as a piece of rebar with a handle welded onto it. But there are also probes you can get that are just like a long, thin probe of metal that you can push. It has a cone on the end and you push it down into the soil and it has a gauge to tell you how much pressure you have to apply to push it down. And those are really nice to just assess if you've got layers in the soil of compacted soil that might indicate a plow pan. And yeah, definitely they have pretty good indicators to give you an idea of where you're reaching a level of compaction that is too much for a root to bust through. And also to know exactly where that is in your soil, because they've got gauges on the side so that they've just got like markings so you know how deep that layer of compaction might be.
And I think you were mentioning Seth and Jennica, a Growing for Market magazine article earlier. And I know there was one in, I think it was early last year, that talked about using a penetrometer also to evaluate when one might need to broad fork and when you could just like stir up hoe in the last crop and reseed.
Yeah, one of the farmers that I've worked with, Les McCary, uses a penetrometer a lot because they use broad forking a good deal for their bed prep. And yeah, they say the penetrometer has saved them a lot of time in terms of, you know, deciding whether it's necessary to broad fork a bed or not. Of course, it depends if you have a 5-year-old to do it for you. If you've got a 5-year-old to do your broad forking, then, you know, go for it. Well, we are at the hour, so I just want to thank Seth, Jennica, and Ruthanna so much for sharing what is going on out at the Farley Centre. For those who haven't been there, it is a very beautiful location and a really wonderful place to visit, with some really amazing work going on there. So thank you very much for sharing.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If folks have follow-up questions, feel free to send me an email, get in touch, and I will be sending out information about our next presentation, which will be coming up next month. Thank you all very much.
Bye, everyone.